You're listening to Lexington Community Radio, WLXU 93.9, and this is Bike Talk.
Hi, I'm your host, Wanda Bertram. Today we are talking about winter bike commuting because, well, 'tis the season. And with us are Eileen Burk and Adam Barnes. Hey guys, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Hey, and you all are here because you are big-time bike commuters and have a lot of experience in this area. So before we actually get into the nitty-gritty of bike commuting, and more specifically how to do that in the wintertime safely, we'd like to know a little bit more about you all. Can you tell us where you're from and a little bit about how you got together? Let's get personal. Let's start with the good stuff.
Well, I can start by how Eileen and I met. Bikes actually brought us together.
No kidding.
Yeah.
That's true.
Several years ago, we rode in a community fundraiser and food drive called the Cranksgiving Ride, and it happens every year around Thanksgiving time.
Cool event.
Very, very. And we just happened to be riding along with one another, and she chatted me up a little bit afterwards, and we've been together since.
Wow.
Yeah.
So a romance built on bikes.
Yes.
Pretty much, it's true.
Yeah. Now, Eileen, you're not from Lexington, though, are you?
I am not. I grew up in South Metro Denver, and that's kind of when I first became interested in bikes because it's a very congested, car-heavy culture. Everything's far away, not very friendly towards alternative modes of transportation. And let's face it, those beautiful Rocky Mountains, they're often covered in smog. And so that's kind of what got me aware of environmental sustainability and the need to look at other ways to get around town. And then combined with my desire to improve my own fitness, cycling was just really that perfect nexus to work towards a better environment and keep myself healthy.
Which are excellent goals. I think we all need to be a little bit more diligent in both of those respects. Yeah, and what about you, Adam?
Well, I have been living in Lexington now for 16 years. And for the first good part of it, I was always commuting by car. And about 6 years ago, I made the conscious decision that I no longer wanted to commute within the Lexington city limits. It just seemed like I was spending way too much time in my car and that I was taking too much time to get to work in the morning. So I made an effort to move closer to downtown towards my work and that I was going to become a bicycle commuter. And then about 3 years ago, I made the commitment to become an all-round bicycle commuter and make sure that I could cycle throughout all 4 seasons, which is difficult in Kentucky because they can change very quickly.
Yes, it takes quite a commitment.
Yeah.
Yeah, to do that. So you all had decided on your own, kind of individually, that you were going to do this.
We met right around the time that I decided to become a bicycle commuter, so I was still very new at commuting when I met Eileen, and she was a pro by that point, so I took a lot of cues from her.
I bet you taught him a thing or two.
Yeah, maybe a little. But I think I actually prefer biking in Lexington because it is a small town. It's easy to get around. The distances aren't very far, and there's a good mixed-use development where you can live where you work, where you shop. And so it's ridiculous to drive those distances anyway. So I've been doing it for a long time, as opposed to bigger cities where it can be intimidating. So I think Lexington is like a Goldilocks town where the weather's great and the size is great.
So tell me about your commute, your daily commute. What does it look like?
Sure. Thankfully, it's not very far. It's about 3.5 miles each way. And we live downtown Lexington and just pretty much take Richmond Road all the way out to my office, and some parts there's a bike lane, sometimes there's not, but through experience you can learn proper lane positioning to just ride in the road to where you're going.
And we're going to learn more about you on that kind of positioning and that experience that you have to get more people out there commuting safely. And what about you, Adam? What does your daily commute look like?
My commute's a little bit shorter, but a little bit more congested because I commute on UK's campus. So I have not as much car traffic to deal with, but it's a lot of student and foot traffic. So where Eileen is in the midst of cars, I am more cognizant of students and class changes and scheduling my commute to make sure I miss some of those things.
So between the two of you, you have a very varied experience in commuting and dealing with a lot of obstacles, whether it's weather, whether it's traffic, whether it's watching for pedestrians and all of the rules that you work around to do those things. So why don't we get into some of the basics? We're going to talk a lot about winter commuting more specifically because we're there. But what about just basics for commuting? What kind of recommendations or experiences can you share for commuting very generally on a bike?
Well, the first thing you need to know is it doesn't take a lot to get started. You just need your bike and yourself. Unlike other outdoor pursuits or having a car, it's not very expensive and you don't need specialized gear other than the bike itself. Some people can get pretty fancy in their options, but you can buy a used bike and get on the road pretty quickly. So that's one of the great aspects of cycling that I've always enjoyed.
I guess I'll take the part of getting a routine down. Getting started in the morning and making sure that you make it a daily occurrence. And then once you actually get into a routine, the commute becomes easier and it just becomes how you get to work in the morning. You don't fall into that, I want to get into my car, I just want to take it easy today. If it just becomes a part of your day, then it becomes a lot easier to become an all-around cycling commuter.
So I know this is a big question for a lot of people who don't commute, and I know it stops some people from doing it. What do you wear, and how do you make that adjustment from cycling to work into work?
Oh, that's a really good question. So I want to make it as easy on myself as possible. So what I ride in is what I wear at work. I work in a mixed environment between office and field work. So I wear loose-fitting slacks and a comfortable top, and I just keep it easy. I don't bother with having cycling specific clothes that I have to change in and out of, because that would be an obstacle for me, that extra time necessary, because I don't like having to get up any earlier than what I have to. I'm not a morning person.
Sister.
And to that, I also wear exactly what I'm going to be wearing to work that day on my cycle commute. But I know that some people like the visibility of certain bike-specific gear. A very simple piece of overclothing that you can throw on that'll make your commute safer if you're worried about visibility would be a high-vis vest. And that can go over whatever you're wearing to work that day. And it's a cheaper piece of gear, and that improves your safety and visibility on the road.
And helmets.
Yes.
We both are helmet wearers. Yes.
I'm a big advocate for helmet use. I've been hit before and have definitely had the helmet save my noggin from more serious injury.
And even commuting within traffic, it's not a lot of times the obvious things that may throw you. I have had a wreck and cracked a helmet by hitting a rut in the concrete that I didn't quite see. So helmets are very important to both of us because they have saved us both on a couple occasions.
And I would hate to scare new riders. In the 15 years I've been riding, I've only had one collision with a car. So that's probably better records than most car-on-car interactions.
That's true. And always the rules of the road.
Oh, of course, yes. I will default to Eileen on handling those because she's much more well-versed in those than I am.
The more I get involved in the Lexington cycling community and my work volunteering at Broke Spoke, the nonprofit community bike shop, the more I feel the need to be a role model in my cycling behavior. So I do I do follow the rules of the road, behave as a car in traffic, stop at red lights, stop at stop signs, and don't be weaving in and out amongst cars. You just, if there's no bike lane available, just ride in the lane. That lane position in the right tire tread is one of the safest places to be in the absence of a bike lane because of that visibility in the lane of traffic.
I'm not sure
Yes.
if Eileen mentioned it, but riding with traffic and also being on sidewalks is not as safe as you would think because cars aren't looking for bicycles coming off of crosswalks and sidewalks, whereas they are looking for you in the road going with the flow of traffic.
Excellent advice. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that and about how you move into winter commuting when we get back. We're going to take a short break. Welcome back to Bike Talk on Lexington Community Radio. I'm your host, Wanda Bertram, and we're talking about winter bike commuting with Eileen Burk and Adam Barnes, two avid bike commuters. They've been doing it for years, and they have lots of advice. We've been talking about commuting in general and how you do that safely. We're going to talk a little bit now about commuting in the winter. And guys, why don't we start with the all-important gear? Maybe like gear for ourselves and gear for our bikes. How about we start with gear for ourselves?
Sure.
How do you gear up, Eileen?
So when the temperatures start to plummet, you start having to think about layers and keeping yourself warm. And that is when some natural fibers like wool and down are so important. And how that wool and down keep you warm is keeping an air layer next to your body, and it creates lots of air pockets to insulate and keep you warm. So it's also important to know that there's a perfect balance. If you walk out the door and you're so dressed that you're perfectly comfortable, you're going to overheat during your ride. So you need to learn what is enough, but what is too much. So a couple of core layers on your body, and then maybe a down jacket to provide that extra layer of insulation. But what's really important is blocking the wind.
Okay, yeah, and I second exactly what Eileen said. The one thing that most people don't realize is a lot of times you don't have to get specialized gear. Go raid your closet, and you probably already have most of everything you need to get started. Like Eileen said, I like to do my base layer of natural fibers, then do an insulating layer over top of that, and then do a wind blocking layer. And for blocking the wind, old rain pants or a raincoat work wonderfully. And you do that over top of an insulating layer, and you could be set to go for winter commuting with the gear on yourself.
Wow. And one thing, too, that I wondered about when I've seen people commuting and that I've had to deal with a little myself is you're going to go to work. So when you get there, so is it better to add layers on top of your work clothes? How do you deal with that? Because Eileen mentioned in our first segment, you don't want to add too
much. I do a little bit of both. When it's just milder temps, I tend to add on top just light jackets. But then when it gets really, really cold, I do have thermal layers that I wear. But they're breathable enough that I wear them all day without having to take them off or change clothes.
And I would say for that, my pro tip on that would be wool.
Wool.
Wool is the answer.
Wool is the answer. It is not like most high-end athletic apparel that can hold sweat and wick sweat and then cause smells and odors when you get to work. It is breathable so that it insulates but also breathes. So that is one of my favorite things, is that I start with wool and then I start building the extra layers on top of that.
So very good advice, because there are times when you are going to work up a little sweat.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And then once you have your core down, the extremities are a little bit harder. I don't think keeping your core is at the right temperature is a challenge. The bigger challenge is your feet and your hands and your head. So when riding, I wear a nice pair of leather boots. They're great because they block wind, and just a regular pair of hiking boots is sufficient. And then you can just wear a thick pair of wool socks and keep your feet toasty and warm.
And as far as your hands go, there is no perfect glove. Again, you can get the highest end bicycling gloves out there, which I've tried. And then Eileen wears a pair of old mittens, and most of the time her hands are warmer than mine. Blocking the wind is the name of the game when it comes to keeping your extremities warm. So anything that you have that can block the wind and keep it off of your skin or getting through to your skin, that's going to keep your hands and feet a whole lot warmer.
I was pretty lucky with a hand-me-down pair of down waterproof mittens. These things are comically large, but they're pretty big, giant mittens, but they do great because they are so big. You have that huge air insulation keeping your hands toasty warm, and I can actually layer another pair of fleece gloves inside of them, so my hands stay pretty warm even into single-digit weather.
So you combine gloves and mittens together.
Yes, yeah. I do.
Because that's the old gloves or mittens,
Little of both over here.
And a pair of good socks go a long way for keeping your feet warm. And some of the old schoolyard remedies work really well too. If you need to keep an extra bit of wind off of your feet, bread bags on top of your socks inside your shoes anything to prevent that wind from getting through to your skin will help. You will create a little microclimate inside your shoes with those bread bags, and that can keep your feet warm.
And to keep your head warm, because we are helmet wearers, you really need a thin layer. I'm a big fan of a buff or a really long neck gaiter that you can pull up over your ears and over to your head and essentially fold it like a balaclava that goes over your head and neck and can pull up onto your nose, but gives you a lot more flexibility in the ways you can wear it.
I definitely think that's Eileen's favorite piece of gear. It's her essential not going out the door without her piece of gear, because if your face stays warm during your ride, it's going to make it a lot more pleasant, because that's where you're going to notice, because you have so many nerves on your face, that if you can keep your face warm, it's going to make your ride a lot more enjoyable.
That's a really, really good point. What about hoods? Hoods let air circulate, though.
Hoods do let air circulate. It would fall under the same issue that I have with wearing ski goggles to keep your eyes warm and dry. We are commuters. We do ride in traffic, so anything that would prevent peripheral vision is something that I don't see as a perfect piece of gear. So I'd rather deal with that little bit of cold uncomfort without sacrificing my vision while I'm riding, to just be, again, on the safe side of things.
Yeah, so don't sacrifice your vision for the warmth.
Correct. If you're sacrificing safety to be warm, that's when you want to think about starting to adjust your gear.
Yeah. What about gear for your bike?
One of the first things you need, especially in the wintertime because it gets dark so early, is a good set of lights, a bright headlight and a bright tail light. You have a lot of options out there. One of the biggest difference is batteries versus USB rechargeable. And they both have their pros and cons. Battery lights are a lot less expensive, but they're not as bright. And they have the problem where as the battery dies, the light gets dimmer and dimmer, so you think it's still working and you have that false sense of security. Versus USB lights, they're more expensive, but they're a lot brighter, but you have to charge them every couple of days if you're riding it on the brighter setting.
So maybe set up a charging station by your bike.
Or once you get to work, have somewhere to plug them in.
Good idea.
As far as your bike itself, any bike will do in the wintertime. No need to go out and get a specialty bike or necessarily need a mountain bike. During the worst weather that we had a couple weeks ago, I rode my road bike with very narrow tires and did just fine. I didn't adjust my bike, I adjusted the way I rode and just adjusted that to the conditions that I was riding in. That said, some tires are a little bit more preferable, and especially for new commuters. A knobby mountain tire will not necessarily provide you more traction than a
wide city tire.
A wide city bike tire. A wide city bike tire would actually be preferable because there's more surface contact with the road at all times. So I would prefer a little bit wider of a tire that is flat tread, and that provides me with plenty of traction through most of the winter conditions.
Yeah, we both ride old 10 speeds year round. And some people need an excuse to get a bike, and if you need to use the winter weather as an excuse to get a new bike, don't let that stop you. Feel free.
And
I love good excuses.
Just a few luxury things that you can add on because it can get slushy and wet in the winter. Fenders are great for keeping, especially if it's for your commute and you want to keep the precipitation off of you, snow, ice, sleet. Fenders are wonderful for that. And if you don't want to go the glove route, there's a company out there called Bar Mitts that makes very wonderful addition to your handlebars that will keep the wind off of your hands, and they just stay on your bike, and then you don't have to worry about leaving the door and forgetting your gloves.
It's essentially a neoprene sleeve.
Or pogey,
Or pogey is another name for them that you can slide your hands in, and you're a big fan of those.
Yeah. Those are the little bit of luxury items you can add on to make your commute a little bit more comfortable.
All right. This is really interesting stuff, and we're going to continue the conversation right after our break. So hang with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Bike Talk on Lexington Community Radio. Thanks for tuning in. I'm your host, Wanda Bertram, and I'm here with Eileen Burk and Adam Barnes, two avid bike commuters, 4 seasons, and we're talking about winter bike commuting because that's what's going on right now. And we've talked about commuting in general, how to do it safely. We've talked about gearing up for yourself and gearing up for your bike, and we're ready to hit the road. So, but you know what? It's a little wet out there. How did you ride in wet weather?
You first got to keep your eye on your forecast, because you don't want to be caught in wet weather. You don't want to head to work and be caught in a rainy ride home. So one of the things I always remind myself is to keep a pair of rain pants or a rain jacket in my work bag and readily available when I need them. But for the ride itself, it's always important to test your brakes, because your stopping distance greatly increases, especially if you're riding older bikes. They might not have as much stopping power. So before you really need to slam on your brakes, test them out.
Yeah, and unless you've got those great new disc brakes, but
those are
that's another
wonderful
excuse to get a new bike.
Exactly. That's some pretty fancy new technology in my world.
So test your brakes.
Test your brakes. Watch out for road paint. It's shockingly slippery in wet conditions, whether it's the lane striping on the side of the road or sidewalk crossing paint is extremely slick. So you don't want to cross over that on a sharp angle as you're taking a turn. You want to approach it on more directly and have broad swooping turns around corners, so you don't slip on that.
Yeah, especially
that road paint.
New paint. I've found that to be true, that new paint is
definitely.
particularly slippery.
One of the things that in the wet weather that I think about most is that if you see a puddle, you're not exactly sure how deep that puddle may be. Yes, anytime that I see a puddle, I tend to avoid it at all costs, because it could be a lot deeper than I think, and
Or
that
there
could be a
a
roadhouse.
pothole.
Correct, especially in this winter time of season, whenever those are very prevalent. So I usually keep a lookout, and I'm very cognizant in my headspace during my ride. I like to, know my route very well, so that I'm already familiar with all the cracks and curves in the road, so that whenever they may be covered or obstructed by some weather, that I'm already aware that it's there.
And you know what the safest way to go around it.
Correct. Yes.
Exactly.
You've already thought that through.
So yeah, starting out, in a little bit drier and good conditions, that may get you more prepared. So whenever things do turn a little bit, you're already so into your ride that you know every in and out of that route.
It's good to also look out for blinding downpours. If you can just time your route a little bit, if you know a big weather front is on its way, either leave early or leave a little late, because if a car can't even see the cars in front of them during a heavy downpour, they probably aren't going to see you. So taking a little extra care and leaving a little bit later and for that rain to lighten up, so you still have good visibility for yourself and for others seeing you.
Yeah, and use your lights all the time.
Oh.
We had talked about lights earlier. They're extremely important.
Lights, and something we didn't bring up, that any piece of gear that has a reflective surface on it is wonderful, because that adds to your visibility in both the daytime and evening hours.
And people can always add reflective tape
Yes.
if they don't have
there's
the
lots
gear.
of fun little accessories you can add to add visibility. And on the light front, I ride with my lights on day and night, just if for that extra little glint of visibility can really make a difference.
Absolutely.
And even though we don't get a heck of a lot of snow, this winter has been a little bit snowier than more recent years, but don't let snow intimidate you. It's actually really, really fun. Fresh snow is really fun to ride in. It's a lot like riding through wet grass, where you're going to have a little bit more resistance, so you might have to gear down, but you don't really slide around that much or have very many obstacles in snow. It's more the ice or more chunky older snow that you have to watch out for.
So fresh snow is very fun, but once it's been scraped down or kind of packed down a little bit, that's when you want to really start watching your commute a little bit better. And Eileen mentioned earlier, one of the safest places that you can be is in the right tread of cars in front of you or behind you. That's very visible in snow. You know exactly where those tread lines are, and they are often the ones that are the most clear on the road. So being able to ride in that natural position in the right tire tread of a car is going to be one of your safer places when you make that snowy commute as well, and the snow has begun to be packed down just a little bit. That said, it's packed down. It's not going to be as fun. You're going to want to make sure that you are more cognizant and awake during your ride, because you may have to make a little adjustment here and there. And so it becomes a little bit more challenging, but if you're aware of your ride, then it's going to be just fine.
So drink your coffee before you head out.
Before you get to work. Coffee before you get to work on those mornings.
And once the roads start getting plowed, sometimes the bike lanes aren't cleared, if at all, until it melts. So don't be afraid to take the traffic lane in those instances as well. And also, the bike lane might have an apron of really thick, chunky ice boulders left over from the plows, which can be hazardous. So if that's happening in the bike lane, just merge with traffic and ride in the traffic lane. And drivers seem very surprised by the presence of cyclists during the wintertime, and I find that they tend to give more room and respect for winter riders than during milder temperatures.
They tend to be more empathetic.
Yes.
Because everybody's going a little bit slower and being
Yes.
a little bit more cautious in snowy weather. So they're already a little bit more cautious. So when they see you, they're going to take that same caution.
So, and they're usually very okay with you taking the lane, which you should do to keep people
Correct.
from trying to pass you in an unsafe situation like that when you can't get into the bike lane.
If the bike lane is unsafe, you have all right to be in the lane. So that is where you
take
should
the full lane.
To take the full lane, and that's where you can ride. So you're looking for your safest route, and you are, by all means, allowed to be there.
We don't get that much snow in Kentucky. You're more likely to encounter ice than you are snow, and that can be a bit of a challenge riding through. And some advice for inexperienced riders is to not stiffen up when you encounter ice, but remain loose and ready to react. Sometimes your bike will get pulled in one direction, and you kind of just don't quickly react and be twitchy. That's a good way to
Overcompensate?
Oh, thank you. Overcompensate and fall down. What you want to do is kind of follow the direction of your bike and make balance corrections through your hips and your core. And that's also with wet weather, making really broad, slow turns is so critical. And the paint is slippery when wet. It's even more slippery when
it's
ice is
iced.
over. Yeah.
So that's a good point too, is how to approach intersections and make those turns. It sounds like that's a little bit different too.
As Eileen was saying, making a bigger arcing turn is always better than trying to make a sharp turn in any kind of condition. The sharper you try to make your turn, the less time you're going to give yourself to make any corrections. So the more of a straight line or a swooping arch, as Eileen likes to say, that you make, the more chance you give yourself to make those corrections that may be necessary.
And you're also keeping more of your tire tread in contact with the road surface. When you corner really quickly, you only have that very tiny edge of your tire in contact, and if you hit a patch of ice, the bike will just go out from under you. And so just staying as upright, and to do so you have to make a broad swooping turn, and don't brake as you're turning. Start braking as you approach that turn and before you start.
Well, good. Think of yourself as a big semi when you're making a turn. Okay.
That's a good bit of advice.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to take another break. We'll be back with you in a few moments. Welcome back to Bike Talk on Lexington Community Radio. I'm your host, Wanda Bertram, and today we are talking about winter bike commuting. And with us are Eileen Burk and Adam Barnes, two people who have a lot of experience bike commuting. And we've talked about what to wear, how to gear up our bike, tips for riding in the wet weather and snowy weather on ice. And we've got our bike home, and our bike's a little messy now. It's going to need a little bit of work. What do I do with that?
Well, to start with, anything to prevent a lot of the wear and tear that can go on your bike during winter commuting, if at all possible, you're able to store your bike inside. That will prevent a lot of problems and issues that you will see. So if you're able to get your bike inside and out of the elements, that little bit of prevention will keep your bike newer and maintained better throughout the winter commuting.
And once your bike does get dirty, that road grime and salty slush can really cause a heck of a lot of problems. It can make brakes and cables stick if you don't clean it off. It can also cause rust as well. So it's a good idea to wipe down your bike, ideally weekly or after a really, really particularly messy ride. And you can use just a household all-natural cleaner, method cleaner, Simple Green. There's a couple of options out there. You don't want to use anything too harsh.
Yeah, as Eileen stated, we both ride old 10-speed bikes, which are made of steel. that steel is only protected by a layer of paint, and if that paint is chipped in any way, rust can get in, and then rust can cause havoc on your bike. Whereas most newer bikes are made of carbon or aluminum, where you don't have that issue as much. But with our older steel bikes, we like to get them pretty clean pretty quickly, just to prevent that salt from really setting in and causing any other issues with our bikes.
And if someone is riding a bike that's newer and made of those, newer materials, they still need to clean their bikes off more regularly than they would if they were
Most
riding in
definitely.
the summer.
Definitely, because that grime, not only can it cause corrosion, but it also acts like sandpaper in all your components and can cause additional wear. And then once you wipe it down, you always have to lubricate those parts again, so to keep them moving.
Yeah, and when it goes to that, a good lightweight lubricant will probably serve you best in the wintertime. You don't have the chance of it gumming up and freezing, and it also won't collect as much road grime, because if you use a thick grease or a lubricant that can collect a lot of that salt and road grime, it'll just be a magnet and bring a lot of that to your bike. But a nice lightweight lubricant and oil will work the best.
Can you give some examples of what you all might use on your bike so people have an idea?
Oh, I'm not brand loyal. I use whatever happens to be hanging around. Synthetic lubricants tend to be better for the wintertime than
Local bike shops can make a lot of good
Okay.
recommendations.
Yeah,
'cause
just so people know where to start.
Yeah, Pedro's is a very good lightweight lubricant that I use. I use it for my chain and for some of my other components in the winter. So that was one that I kind of have as a go-to. And again, it's just a lightweight oil that you can find at most any of your bike shops.
as opposed to heavier grease. And then when the days do warm up, give your bike a bath. If you have a hose available to you, just gently hose down your bike. I made a rookie mistake of using the high pressure sprayer, and then quickly realized that when you use a really high pressure spray, you can actually get water in your packed bearings and displace that grease that you need. So just do a gentle spray.
Whoops.
Yeah.
Oh, well.
So yeah, a good bike bath. A clean bike is a happy bike. So if there's any opportunity to get out there and clean your bike, a little soap and water and a gentle brush will do a great job of getting most of that off. Rinse it down, dry your bike off, and you'll be ready for your next ride.
And then come spring, that ever comes, you might need more routine maintenance than if you only ride in milder temps. And the brake pads will wear down, so springtime is a good time to replace brake pads and any other parts that you might have more wear. And a great place to do that if you want to learn how to take care of your bike yourself is at Broke Spoke Community Bike Shop, where you can rent some stand time and work on your bike.
Yeah, let's talk a minute about Broke Spoke, because you guys are volunteers there. What does Broke Spoke offer to people?
Well, it is a do-it-yourself community bike shop that allows folks to come in and learn how to take care of their bikes themselves, as opposed to a more traditional retail bike shop where you just drop it off and they'll take care of it for you. So if you want to learn, it's a great place, great environment to do so. They have stands readily available that they rent for the low price of $4 an hour. And if even that might be a financial barrier, you can volunteer and earn shop credit at $8 an hour to then pay for your stand time or pay for the parts that you might need. And then we have volunteer mechanics that can help guide you through the process to complete any necessary work you may need.
And as for myself, I find it as a great place and resource during the wintertime to go and work on those little bits of preventative maintenance that will go a long time in the winter. So a good place to clean my bike down, a good place to do that oiling of different components when needed. For quick things that you can take care of yourself, I find that that's a wonderful resource come the winter time.
Yeah, and they also accept donated bikes.
They do.
So if you need a bike, you can go, you can work on it, find one, fix it up, and leave with a...
Make it into your winter commuter. If you're nervous about taking your brand new carbon fiber frame out onto the road during the winter conditions, Broke Spoke's a great place to find a bike and become introduced into trying to do the more four-season riding that we've tried.
Exactly.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit more about maintenance, though. Especially, I know, during the year, even in good weather and good conditions, stuff can get caught in your rim and the brake pads. Is that even, I would think that's even more so in the wintertime with all the grit on the road. So checking for that.
Yeah, and that it goes back to making sure you wipe down your bike, because that debris can cause problems if it can bind up in your brakes, and those brakes might not release as quickly as they should, or cause some unpleasant sounds and ticks and creaks if you don't keep your bike and clean and lubricated.
One of the questions we get a lot is about tire pressure and what to do about that come the winter time. And one of the biggest pieces of advice that I would say would not to be to change it too dramatically. Every tire has a designated pressure range to keep your tire within, and as long as you're within that range, the better. If you begin to underinflate your tires, all those little hidden potholes and things that may be underneath of the snow and the weather conditions that you see, those can cause you a pinch flat if your tire is not properly inflated, and there's nothing worse than having to change a tube in cold, wintry weather. So keeping your tires properly inflated within the range designated is where you want to be, even for winter commuting.
Yeah, some folks think keeping your tires underinflated is a good idea for traction, but it's not worth it considering the risk of potentially getting a flat from having underinflated tires.
True. But one thing about winter commuting, too, is that if the weather is that bad and you can't get through, you have options.
Yeah, it's a lot quicker sometimes to actually make it to work on my bike than to try to either dig my car out from the snow or to defrost my car. And the time that it takes me usually to do those things, I could have already been door to door on my bike from my front door to my door at work.
And I've found that you can usually, even in good weather or bad weather, you can get to your destination even quicker than being in a car.
Mm-hmm, exactly. And even if the weather is so bad that you're having trouble riding, or you're just not confident riding through that bad weather, the great thing that you can do, which you can't do with a car, is you can just hop off your bike and walk it to your destination, and you're not abandoning your mode of transportation on the side of the road. You can just get there with your bike and try again when the roads clear up.
So that's why we also, you can never become stranded on your bike. So that's why we also don't like to specialize our gear, so that if we do end up going for a little bit of a snowy walk, we're not in bike shoes that are clipped in, that we're in our normal boots, and we're able to actually walk if we need to.
Well, good advice. Well, and unfortunately, we're going to have to end here because that's all the time that we have for today's show. I'd like to thank our guests, Eileen and Adam, for their time. This has been great, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Hey, I really appreciate it. And don't forget to tune in to Bike Talk at the same time next week for all things cycling, helping you get out, explore our towns and countryside in Lexington and beyond, in any weather. So thanks for joining us. Be safe and enjoy the ride.